The afternoon sun beat down on the empty stretch of road as 17-year-old Amara Jackson walked home from her after-school job. Her school backpack hung heavy on one shoulder, filled with textbooks and notes from her classes. She wore her school uniform, a simple navy skirt and white button-up shirt, now slightly wrinkled after a long day. But it was the oil stains on her hands that told the real story of how she'd spent the last 3 hours. 3 days a week, while other kids went to sports practice or hung out at the mall, Amara worked at Mr. Chen's auto shop. It wasn't just a job to her. It was a connection to her past, to the father who had taught her to love the inner workings of engines before he passed away 2 years ago. Amara wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of grease. The May heat was unusually strong today. She was thinking about the engine she'd been working on, an old Toyota with a timing belt problem, when she spotted something that made her stop in her tracks. There, on the side of the road ahead, sat a car that seemed out of place in this working-class neighborhood. Not just any car, a 1967 Ford Mustang Shelby GT500, midnight blue with perfect white racing stripes running over the top. Amara's heart skipped a beat. This was automotive royalty, the kind of car she and her dad used to dream about while flipping through old car magazines. But something was wrong. Steam poured from under the hood, and a tall man in an expensive-looking, gray suit paced beside it, phone pressed to his ear. Even from a distance, Amara could feel his frustration. "I don't care what meeting you're in," the man was saying into his phone. "I need a tow truck here now." "Yes, for the Shelby." Amara bit her lip. She should just keep walking. The man clearly didn't need some teenage girl bothering him, but that car, that beautiful machine, was in trouble. Before she knew what she was doing, her feet carried her toward the stranded Mustang. "Excuse me," she said, her voice coming out smaller than she intended. The man turned, noticing her for the first time. He was older than she first thought, maybe around 50, with salt and pepper hair and a clean-shaven face that looked like it belonged on a business magazine cover. His expression was a mix of surprise and annoyance at the interruption. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone before hanging up. "Can I help you?" His tone suggested he thought it was the other way around. Amara straightened her shoulders. "Actually, I was going to ask if you needed help with your car." A brief smile flashed across the man's face before disappearing. "That's kind of you, but I've got roadside assistance coming eventually." He glanced at his watch with obvious irritation. "I know a bit about cars," Amara said, gesturing toward the Mustang. "Mind if I take a look?" The man's eyebrows rose slightly. He looked from Amara's school uniform to her oil-stained hands, clearly putting the pieces together. "No offense, but this is a very rare and valuable vehicle. I think I should wait for the professionals." Amara nodded, used to this reaction. "That's a Shelby GT500 with the 428 Police Interceptor V8 engine. Only about 2,000 were made with that. Exact setup. And judging by the steam, you've probably got a busted radiator hose or maybe a loose clamp. I could at least check it out while you wait." The man's expression changed from dismissive to surprised in an instant. He studied her face more carefully now. "You know your classics." "My dad owned a garage," Amara said simply. "I've been learning since I could hold a wrench." After a moment's hesitation, the man stepped aside. "I'm Richard Donovan," he said, extending his hand. "Amara Jackson," she replied, shaking it briefly before turning her attention to the car. "Do you mind?" she asked, gesturing to the hood. "Be my guest." Amara carefully propped open the hood, mindful not to touch the hot metal. The steam had lessened, but the problem was immediately clear to her trained eye. Just as she suspected, a split in one of the radiator hoses. Nothing too serious if caught early, but it could have led to major engine damage if Richard had tried to drive it much further. "You've got a tear in your upper radiator hose," she explained, pointing to the rubber tube without touching it. "The engine's too hot to work on right now, but once it cools down, I could rig something temporary to get you to a proper shop." Richard peered at where she was pointing. "How temporary are we talking?" "With the right materials, good enough to get you across town." Amara thought for a moment. "Do you have any water bottles? And maybe a first aid kit with some tape?" Richard nodded, opening the Mustang's passenger door to retrieve a small emergency kit and an unopened bottle of water from a leather messenger bag. As he handed them to Amara, he seemed to be reassessing her. "So you work at a garage after school?" he asked, watching as she carefully unzipped the emergency kit. 3 days a week at Mr. Chen's auto shop, Amara confirmed, finding some strong medical tape in the kit. "I'm finishing my certification program through school. Another year and I'll be fully licensed." "Most kids your age are glued to their phones, not learning trades," Richard commented. Amara shrugged. "Cars make sense to me. Always have." She didn't mention that working at the shop was also helping her mom with bills, or that her dream of attending engineering school seemed further away with each passing month. Time passed as they waited for the engine to cool. Richard made another call, canceling his roadside assistance request. Amara sat on the curb nearby, occasionally checking the engine's temperature with careful fingers. "So, what does a guy like you do to afford a car like this?" Amara finally asked, breaking the somewhat awkward silence. Richard smiled slightly. "I run a tech company, Donovan Technologies." Amara's eyes widened. Even she had heard of Donovan Tech. They made software and hardware that was in practically every office in America. "Wait, you're that Richard Donovan?" "Guilty as charged," he replied with a small nod. "And you don't know how to fix a radiator hose?" Amara asked, before she could stop herself. To her surprise, Richard laughed, a genuine laugh that softened his entire face. "I know my way around computer code, not car engines. I collect classics because I appreciate their design and history, but the mechanics," he trailed off with a shrug. "That's why I have people. Everyone should know the basics about what they drive," Amara said, standing up to check the engine again. "It's cool enough now. Let me show you what I'm going to do. For the next 20 minutes. Amara worked carefully under the hood. She fashioned a temporary patch using materials from the emergency kit, explaining each step to Richard, who watched with growing interest and respect. Her hands moved with confidence, muscle memory, from years of watching and helping her father perform similar repairs. "My dad would have loved this car," she said softly as she worked. "He had a thing for American classics. Said they had soul that modern cars just don't have." "Your dad sounds like a wise man," Richard replied. "Is he still?" Amara shook her head, focusing on tightening the makeshift clamp she'd created. "Cancer 2 years ago." Richard nodded, not offering empty words of sympathy, which Amara appreciated. As she reached for the final piece of tape, the silver ring on her right hand caught the fading sunlight. It wasn't fancy, just a simple band with what looked like a small wrench engraved on it, but Richard noticed how she unconsciously touched it with her thumb before continuing her work. "There," Amara said finally, stepping back from the car. "That should hold until you get it properly fixed. Don't push it above 40 miles per hour and get it to a shop straight away." Richard looked genuinely impressed. "Thank you, Amara. You've saved me a lot of time and trouble today." He reached for his wallet. "Please let me compensate you for your help." Amara shook her head. "No need for that. Just doing what my dad would have done." She wiped her hands on a clean tissue from the emergency kit. "Besides, I got to see inside a Shelby GT500. That's payment enough." Richard studied her for a moment, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card instead of cash. "At least take my card. If you ever need anything, job, reference, whatever, give me a call." Amara accepted the card, reading Richard Donovan, CEO, in simple black letters against white cardstock. It felt heavy, expensive. "Thanks," she said, tucking it carefully into her backpack. As she turned to continue her walk home, neither of them could have guessed how that chance encounter, a stranded millionaire and a schoolgirl with oil-stained hands, would change both their lives forever. Richard leaned against the side of his Mustang, watching with growing fascination as Amara worked. The temporary fix she'd created was holding well. No more steam escaped from under the hood, and the engine temperature gauge had stopped its dangerous climb toward the red zone. But what really caught his attention was how this schoolgirl handled his prized possession. "So what made you decide to study auto mechanics?" Richard asked, partly out of genuine curiosity and partly to break the silence as Amara made final adjustments. Amara's hands didn't pause in their work as she answered, "It wasn't really a decision, more like something I was born into." She tightened a connection with careful precision. "My earliest memories are of sitting on a little stool in my dad's garage, handing him tools while he fixed up old cars." The evening sun cast long shadows across the road as they talked. A few cars drove past, the drivers slowing to admire the classic Mustang before continuing on their way. "Most of his customers couldn't afford fancy repair shops," Amara continued. "He charged fair prices, sometimes just took whatever people could pay. He always said cars should run properly no matter what's in your wallet." Richard nodded, thinking about how differently he approached his own business. Donovan Technologies wasn't known for its affordability, quite the opposite. They made premium products with premium price tags to match. "Your fix is holding nicely," he said, changing the subject as he checked his watch. "My assistant should be here soon with proper parts. I called while you were working." "Good," Amara replied, stepping back from the car and wiping sweat from her forehead. "This is just a bandage. You'll need a real repair before you drive it any real distance." As if on cue, a sleek black SUV pulled up behind the Mustang. A younger man in a crisp suit stepped out carrying a small toolbox. Behind him came another man, older with weathered hands and a confident stride that Amara recognized immediately as belonging to someone who knew cars inside and out. "Mr. Donovan," the younger man said, approaching quickly. "I've brought Mr. Torres as requested along with the parts." "Thank you, David," Richard replied before turning to the older man. "Luis, thanks for coming on such short notice." Luis Torres nodded respectfully to Richard before his eyes fell on Amara, still standing by the open hood. "This the young lady you mentioned?" "Yes. This is Amara Jackson. She's been keeping my car from overheating while we waited." Richard gestured between them. "Amara, this is Luis Torres. He maintains my collection of classic cars." Luis approached the Mustang, giving Amara a friendly nod. "Let's see what we're working with here." Together they bent over the engine. Luis examined Amara's temporary repair with experienced eyes, his expression changing from professional curiosity to genuine respect. "Very clever," he said, pointing to how she'd reinforced the split hose. "Where'd you learn this technique?" "My dad used it once when we got stranded in the middle of nowhere," Amara explained. "Said knowing tricks like this was more important than having fancy tools." Luis chuckled. "Your dad was right. I've been fixing cars for 30 years and I couldn't have done better myself with what you had on hand." Pride warmed Amara's chest at the professional's approval. This was why she loved working with cars. There was no faking knowledge or skill. Either you knew what you were doing or you didn't. And when someone who really understood recognized your ability, it meant something. As Luis began unpacking the proper replacement parts, Amara gathered her backpack, preparing to leave. Her mom would be wondering where she was by now. "I should get going," she said to Richard. "Looks like you're in good hands now." Richard frowned slightly. "At least let me give you a ride home. It's getting late." "It's okay, I only live about 15 minutes from here." Amara shifted her backpack to her other shoulder. "Besides, I walk this way all the time." "Then at least, let me pay you for your help," Richard insisted, reaching for his wallet again. Amara shook her head firmly. "Really, I don't need payment. It was nice just to work on such an amazing car." As she adjusted her backpack strap, the dying sunlight caught something on her hand. The silver ring on her right hand glinted, drawing Richard's attention. It wasn't flashy or expensive looking, just a simple band with what appeared to be some kind of small tool engraved on its surface. "That's an interesting ring," Richard said, nodding toward her hand. Amara's other hand moved automatically to touch it, rotating it slightly on her finger, a gesture that seemed unconscious, done from habit rather than thought. "It was my dad's," she said quietly, her usual confidence momentarily replaced by something softer. "He always wore it when he worked. Said it was his lucky charm." Richard stepped closer, genuinely interested. May I? After a moment's hesitation, Amara held out her hand. The ring was simple sterling silver, worn smooth in places from years of use. The engraving was a small wrench, its details softened by time but still clearly visible. He gave it to me on my 13th birthday, Amara explained. Said I'd earned the right to wear it after rebuilding my first carburetor by myself. A small smile touched her lips at the memory. When he got sick, he made me promise to keep it on whenever I worked on cars. Said it would guide my hands when his couldn't anymore. Richard nodded, understanding the weight of such an inheritance. In his world of tech billionaires and corporate acquisitions, people measured worth by stock prices and property portfolios. But this simple silver ring clearly meant more to Amara than any diamond he could have offered her. Your father sounds like he was a remarkable man, Richard said, meaning it. He was. Behind them, Luis had finished examining the engine and was now explaining something to David, who was taking notes on his tablet. The Mustang sat waiting, its midnight blue paint deepening as evening approached. Do you mind if I ask what happened to him? Richard asked gently. Cancer, Amara replied, her voice steady but quieter than before. It happened fast, 6 months from diagnosis to, well, she shrugged, a gesture that tried to minimize something that couldn't be made small. Mom's a nurse, so she took good care of him at home, and I kept the garage running as best I could after school, but eventually we had to sell it to pay the medical bills. Richard felt something shift inside him, a perspective changing. He'd been annoyed when his car broke down, seeing it as an inconvenience in his carefully scheduled day. Now he found himself strangely grateful for the mechanical failure that had brought this determined young woman into his path. Luis approached them, wiping his hands on a rag. Mr. Donovan, I've inspected the damage. The young lady's repair was excellent, but we should replace the entire cooling system to be safe. I've got the basic parts with me, but I'd like to take it back to the workshop for a complete check. Richard nodded. Whatever you think is best, Luis. He turned back to Amara. It seems I owe you more thanks than I realized. Not just for fixing my car, but for treating it with such care. Amara smiled, a genuine full smile that lit up her face. That's how my dad taught me. Every car deserves respect, whether it's a $1 million classic or a beat-up old truck. As Luis and David prepared to transport the Mustang back to Richard's private workshop, Richard found himself reluctant to end his conversation with this unusual teenager. There was something remarkable about her, not just her mechanical skill, but her character. In his world of yes-men and opportunists, Amara's straightforward honesty was refreshing. Amara, he said as she turned to leave, I have a proposition for you. But I think it deserves more than a rushed conversation on the side of the road. Would you be willing to meet me tomorrow? Perhaps at your school's career center or somewhere public where you'd feel comfortable? Amara looked at him with curiosity. What kind of proposition? A professional one, Richard clarified. I run several scholarship programs through my foundation, and I think you might be an excellent candidate. For the first time since they'd met, Amara looked genuinely uncertain. I should probably talk to my mom first. Of course, Richard agreed. Immediately. In fact, I'd prefer to speak with her as well. He pulled out another business card, this one with his private number handwritten on the back. Have her call me if she has any questions. Amara took the card carefully, studying it before tucking it into the pocket of her uniform shirt. I'll talk to her tonight. As they parted ways, Amara continuing her walk home and Richard climbing into the SUV with David, neither could have predicted how significantly their lives would soon intertwine, all because of a broken-down car and a silver ring that carried a father's legacy. The clock on the wall of Bright Future High School's Career Center ticked loudly in the quiet room. Amara sat with her hands folded in her lap, her school uniform neat and pressed, a sharp contrast to how Richard had first seen her with oil-stained hands. Beside her sat her mother, Vanessa Jackson, still wearing light blue scrubs from her morning shift at the hospital. Across the table, Richard Donovan waited patiently while Mrs. Wallace, the school's career counselor, reviewed the documents he'd brought. The middle-aged counselor's eyes widened slightly as she turned each page. Well, Mrs. Wallace finally said, looking up over her reading glasses. This is certainly one of the most generous scholarship offers I've ever seen presented to one of our students. Amara glanced at her mother, who squeezed her hand encouragingly, but remained cautious. They'd talked late into the night after Amara had come home with Richard's business card. At first, her mother had been skeptical. Why would a tech billionaire take interest in a high school student? But after calling the number on the card and speaking with Richard herself, she'd agreed to this meeting. As I explained on the phone, Richard said, directing his words to Vanessa, "The Donovan Foundation offers scholarships to exceptional young people who demonstrate unusual talent and drive. After seeing your daughter's mechanical abilities firsthand, I believe she's exactly the kind of student we want to support." Mrs. Wallace nodded. "The foundation has an excellent reputation. They've funded several students from schools in our district over the years, though never from Bright Future until now." "So what exactly would this scholarship cover?" Vanessa asked, her voice professional but guarded. As a single mother who'd been struggling to make ends meet since her husband's death, she'd learned to be cautious about things that seemed too good to be true. Richard leaned forward slightly. "Full tuition to any engineering school Amara is accepted to, plus living expenses, books, and supplies. We also provide paid summer internships at one of our partner companies during college breaks. In Amara's case, I'd like to offer her a position at my private classic car restoration shop, given her particular talents." Amara had stayed silent until now, but at the mention of the restoration shop, she couldn't hold back. "You have a restoration shop? For classics like your Mustang?" Richard smiled. "I have a collection of about 20 vintage cars. Luis, the mechanic you met yesterday, runs the shop with a small team. It's not a commercial operation, just for maintaining my collection. But they could certainly use someone with your skills during the summer months." The career counselor beamed. "This is a tremendous opportunity, Amara. With your grades and this kind of financial support, you could apply to any engineering program in the country." Vanessa looked at her daughter, seeing the spark of hope in her eyes. Since Thomas had died, money had been tight. Despite working extra shifts, she knew that sending Amara to a top engineering school would have been nearly impossible without taking on crushing debt. "It sounds wonderful," Vanessa admitted, "but I have to ask, why Amara specifically? I'm sure there are many talented students you could support." It was a fair question, and one Richard had been expecting. "The foundation looks for unique talent, yes, but also character. When your daughter helped me yesterday, she didn't know who I was and she refused payment afterward. She showed exceptional skill, but more importantly, she demonstrated integrity and a genuine passion for her craft. Those qualities are harder to find than you might think." Richard reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder with the Donovan Foundation logo embossed on it. "This contains all the formal details of the scholarship offer, including the terms and conditions. I encourage you to take it home, review it carefully, and consult with a lawyer if you wish. There's no pressure to decide immediately." Amara looked down at the folder, barely believing this was happening. Just yesterday, she'd been walking home from her part-time job, worrying about how she'd ever afford college. And now, "There's one more thing," Richard said, interrupting her thoughts. "The scholarship is not charity. It's an investment in Amara's future. We expect recipients to maintain excellent grades and to eventually give back through mentoring future scholars." This statement actually made Amara relax slightly. She didn't want a handout. She wanted an opportunity to earn her own success. "I ask something?" Amara said, finding her voice. Richard nodded. "Of course. If I accept, would I start the internship this summer? And would I really get to work on cars like your Mustang?" Richard smiled. "Yes, to both questions. Luis was very impressed with your work. He told me you have, and I quote, hands that understand engines. That's high praise from him." For the first time since the meeting began, Amara allowed herself a small smile. Working on classic cars all summer, learning from a master mechanic like Luis, and then going to engineering school, it was more than she'd dared to dream. "Like to think about it," she said, glancing at her mother, "and talk it over some more at home." "Of course," Richard agreed. Take all the time you need." As the meeting concluded, Mrs. Wallace escorted them to the door, barely containing her excitement about having a Donovan Foundation scholar at her school. Richard shook hands with both Amara and her mother, his manner professional but warm. "One last thing," he said as they prepared to leave. "Luis asked me to tell you that he's replacing the entire cooling system in the Mustang, but he kept your temporary repair to show the other mechanics. He was quite impressed by your ingenuity." Amara's cheeks warmed at the compliment. "Thank you for telling me that." After saying their goodbyes, Amara and her mother walked to the bus stop in thoughtful silence. The bright yellow folder sat in Amara's backpack, feeling somehow heavier than all her textbooks combined. "What do you think, Mom?" Amara finally asked as they waited for the bus. Vanessa sighed, wrapping an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "I think your father would be bursting with pride right now. But I also think we need to read all the fine print before getting too excited." Amara nodded, unconsciously twisting her father's ring around her finger. "Do you think there's a catch? Something we're missing?" "Not necessarily," her mother replied carefully. "But in my experience, opportunities like this don't just fall from the sky without reason." The bus arrived, and they found seats near the back. As they rode home, Amara stared out the window, thinking about everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. Her mind kept returning to the moment when Richard had noticed her father's ring. There had been something in his expression then, a recognition perhaps of what it meant to carry someone's legacy. That evening, after dinner, Amara and her mother spread the contents of the folder across their small kitchen table. The scholarship documents were detailed but surprisingly straightforward: full financial support throughout college, paid internships, and mentoring opportunities. There were requirements too: maintaining a 3.5 GPA, participating in foundation events, and eventually mentoring younger students. "It seems legitimate," Vanessa said after they'd read everything twice. "I even called the foundation's main office while you were finishing homework, and they confirmed everything." Amara traced her finger over the Donovan Foundation logo. "So you think I should accept?" Vanessa took her daughter's hands in hers. "Honey, this is your decision. But yes, I think this is a real opportunity. Sometimes good things happen because we deserve them, not because there's a catch." Amara thought about her father, about how he'd always told her that her hands were meant for creating, for fixing, for making things better. He'd believed in her talent long before anyone else had noticed it. "I want to accept," she said finally. "But I want to do it my way." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Amara reached for her laptop and opened a new document. "I'm going to write an email to Mr. Donovan. I want to thank him for the opportunity, but I also want to make it clear that I'm not going to be indebted to anyone. I'll work hard and earn this scholarship, not just receive it." Her mother smiled, recognizing the stubborn determination that Amara had inherited from her father. "That sounds like a good plan." For the next hour, Amara carefully crafted her email, writing and rewriting until each word felt right. She accepted the scholarship with gratitude, but also with dignity. And at the end, after much consideration, she added one more thing, a request that was deeply personal. "Mom," she said, looking up from the screen, "I want to ask him about Dad's garage. The building's up for auction next month. What if the foundation could help us buy it back, not as a gift but as part of their investment in my future? We could start rebuilding the business slowly while I'm in school." Vanessa's eyes widened. "Amara, that's asking a lot. The garage has been closed for over a year." "I know," Amara admitted. "But it was Dad's dream that I would take over someday, and Mr. Donovan talks about investing in my future. Well, that garage is my future, or at least part of it." After a long moment, Vanessa nodded. "Add it. The worst he can say is no." With a deep breath, Amara added her request to the email. Her finger hovered over the send button for several seconds before she finally pressed it. That night, as she got ready for bed, Amara looked at her father's ring in the dim light of her bedside lamp. "I hope I'm doing the right thing, Dad," she whispered. before turning out the light and drifting into a sleep filled with dreams of engines, scholarships, and a small garage with her family's name above the door. Amara's phone buzzed on her nightstand at 6:14 a.m., jolting her awake. She fumbled for it in the dim morning light, expecting her alarm. Instead, she found an email notification. The sender, Richard Donovan. Her heart jumped to her throat. She'd sent her response to his scholarship offer just before midnight, adding that bold request about her father's garage. She hadn't expected a reply so soon, certainly not before sunrise. With slightly shaking fingers, she opened the email. "Dear Amara," it began. "Thank you for your thoughtful response to the scholarship offer. Your determination to maintain your independence while accepting this opportunity speaks volumes about your character. I respect that greatly." Amara sat up in bed, pulling her blanket around her shoulders as she continued reading. "Regarding your request about your father's garage, I've had my team look into the property. You're right that it's coming up for auction next month. Rather than simply purchasing it outright, I have a different proposition. The Donovan Foundation has a small business incubator program that helps promising entrepreneurs establish themselves. I believe Jackson Auto Restoration could qualify as our first mechanical business in this program." Amara's breath caught. He wasn't dismissing her request. He was offering even more than she'd hoped for. This would work as follows. The foundation would provide initial capital investment to secure the property and basic equipment. Your mother would hold majority ownership, 51%, with you holding 25% and the foundation 24%. As you complete your education and gain experience, you would have the option to buy out the foundation's share gradually. This maintains your family's control of the business while providing the support needed to reestablish it. This is not charity. It's a business investment in what I believe could be a successful enterprise, particularly given your unique skills. By now, Amara was fully awake, reading and rereading the words on her screen. She continued scrolling. "If this interests you, I suggest we meet again, this time with my business development team to discuss details. I've also taken the liberty of inviting Luis Torres, as he has expressed interest in potentially consulting for your restored business on a part-time basis until you complete your education. Please consider this offer carefully and let me know your thoughts. Regardless of your decision on the garage proposal, the scholarship offer stands independently. Sincerely, Richard Donovan." Amara jumped out of bed, nearly tripping over her backpack in her rush to reach her mother's room. Vanessa was just getting up for her early hospital shift when Amara burst through the door. "Mom, you won't believe this." 20 minutes later, mother and daughter sat at their kitchen table, both still in pajamas, staring at the email on Amara's phone. "Do you think it's for real?" Amara asked, her voice hushed with disbelief. Vanessa shook her head slowly, not in denial but in amazement. "It sounds legitimate. The business structure he's proposing is actually very fair, better than fair, really." "We could get Dad's garage back," Amara whispered, twisting her father's ring around her finger. "Not just the building, but the business, too." Vanessa reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "Your father always said you were meant for bigger things than just working in someone else's shop. He believed you could build something of your own someday." "I never thought it would happen this soon," Amara admitted. They spent the rest of the morning in an excited daze. Vanessa called into work, using a personal day for the first time in months. They made a list of questions, concerns, and ideas for the meeting with Richard's business team. Amara's phone buzzed again with a follow-up email suggesting a meeting time for the following day. Reality was moving faster than either of them had expected. That afternoon, though, doubt began to creep in. Amara was sitting on their small apartment balcony when her best friend Tyler called. "So the rumor is true? You're getting some crazy scholarship from a billionaire?" Tyler asked without preamble. Amara laughed. "News travels fast. Who told you?" "Mrs. Wallace is telling everyone. The whole school's talking about it." Tyler paused. "Is it legit? I mean, some random rich guy just happens to break down where you're walking and now he's offering you everything you've ever wanted? Sounds like the plot of a movie, not real life." Amara frowned. She hadn't thought about how the situation might look to outsiders. It's not like that. He's doing it through his foundation, which has helped lots of students. My mom checked it out. I'm just saying, be careful, Tyler warned. Rich people don't give away money without wanting something in return. After they hung up, Amara couldn't shake Tyler's words. What if there was a catch she wasn't seeing? What if the whole thing was too good to be true? By dinner time, her excitement had turned to worry. Vanessa noticed her daughter picking at her food without eating. What's wrong, honey? You've been quiet all evening. Amara set down her fork. Do you think we're being naive about Mr. Donovan and his offer? Vanessa considered the question carefully. I've been wondering the same thing. It's a lot to process. Tyler thinks there must be a catch, Amara admitted. That no one just gives away opportunities like this without wanting something in return. Her mother nodded thoughtfully. That's often true in life. But I've been doing some research on Richard Donovan all day. His foundation has helped dozens of students over the years. Most of them are doing well now. Doctors, engineers, business owners. And none have come forward with complaints. So you think it's real? That we can trust him? I think we can trust but verify, Vanessa said. Tomorrow we'll ask tough questions. We'll read everything before signing anything, and we'll make sure there are no hidden strings. Amara nodded, feeling slightly better. She pulled out her phone and reread Richard's email, focusing on one line that had stood out to her. This is not charity. It's a business investment in what I believe could be a successful enterprise, particularly given your unique skills. Maybe that was the key. Richard Donovan didn't see himself as giving her charity. He saw her as an investment, a good business decision. There was something comforting about that perspective. It meant she didn't owe him gratitude. She owed him success. That night, Amara sat at her desk and drafted her own list of questions for the meeting. If she was going to accept this opportunity, she needed to do it with clear eyes and firm boundaries. No matter how generous the offer, she wouldn't allow herself to become indebted to anyone, not even a billionaire with good intentions. The next morning, Amara dressed carefully in her best clothes. Dark blue slacks and a crisp white button-up shirt that had once belonged to her father. She tucked his ring safely on her finger, drawing comfort from its familiar weight. As she and her mother prepared to leave for the meeting at the Donovan Foundation offices downtown, Amara glanced at the small framed photo of her father on their hallway table. I hope I'm making you proud, Dad, she whispered, touching the frame lightly. Vanessa heard her and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. He'd be so proud, honey, but mostly, he'd want you to make yourself proud, to do what feels right to you. Amara nodded, taking a deep breath. Then let's go make a deal with a billionaire. The Donovan Foundation building was nothing like Amara had imagined. Instead of a towering glass skyscraper, it was a renovated historic building with warm brick walls and large windows. The lobby featured comfortable seating areas rather than imposing security desks, and the receptionist who greeted them offered genuine smiles along with visitor badges. As they were escorted to the conference room, Amara noticed that the walls were covered not with expensive artwork but with framed photos of scholarship recipients, young people in graduation caps and gowns, working in laboratories, building structures, teaching in classrooms. Each photo included a small plaque with the person's name, field of study, and year of scholarship. All are scholars, explained their guide, noticing Amara's interest. Mr. Donovan likes to remind everyone who works here what our real purpose is. The conference room door opened, revealing Richard Donovan and 3 other people already seated at a round table, not the intimidating boardroom setup Amara had feared. Richard stood to greet them, shaking hands with both Amara and her mother. Ms. Jackson, Amara, thank you for coming. I'm looking forward to our discussion. His tone was professional but warm. Let me introduce my team and then we can get started. As introductions began, Amara straightened her shoulders and prepared herself for whatever came next. This meeting would determine not just her educational future, but potentially the revival of her father's business legacy. She had questions to ask and terms to negotiate. For the first time since her father died, she felt truly ready to build something of her own. 3 years passed like the turning pages of a book, quickly yet filled with more story than seemed possible. On a bright spring morning, Amara Jackson stood in front of a freshly painted building on Maple Street. The sign above the door read, "Jackson and Daughter Auto Restoration" in bold, dark blue letters. The early sunlight caught on the polished chrome letters, making them shine almost as brightly as Amara's smile. At 20, she looked different than she had on that fateful day when she'd helped a stranded millionaire fix his Mustang. Her school uniform had been replaced by proper work overalls, her backpack by a professional toolbox, but some things remained unchanged, like the determined set of her shoulders and the silver ring that still gleamed on her right hand. The sound of an approaching engine made her turn. A familiar midnight blue 1967 Mustang Shelby GT500 pulled into the newly paved parking lot, its engine purring smoothly. Amara's smile widened as Richard Donovan stepped out of the car, dressed more casually than she'd ever seen him in jeans and a button-up shirt. "Right on time," she called out. "As always," Richard smiled as he approached. "Some habits are hard to break. How does it feel to officially open today?" Amara turned back to look at the building, her building now, at least partly. "Honestly, scary and amazing at the same time." Richard nodded, understanding. That's how all the best things feel at the start. The past 3 years had been transformative for both of them. For Amara, life had become a balancing act between her studies at MIT, where she was now a sophomore in mechanical engineering, and helping to resurrect her father's business. The Donovan Foundation had kept every promise, providing not just the scholarship but also the business investment to purchase the garage when it went up for auction. For Richard, the partnership had been unexpectedly rewarding. Used to the cutthroat world of tech acquisitions and venture capital, the simple honesty of helping a talented young woman reclaim her family legacy had reminded him why he'd started his foundation in the first place. "Where's Vanessa?" Richard asked, looking around for Amara's mother, inside fussing over the refreshments for the opening ceremony. "She took the day off from the hospital." Amara grinned. "I told her it's just a small gathering, but she's acting like we're hosting the governor." "Well, it is a big day," Richard said. "Your father would be proud." Amara touched her ring instinctively. "I hope so." Inside, the garage had been completely transformed. The old cramped office where Thomas Jackson had once kept haphazard stacks of invoices was now a modern reception area, with comfortable seating and framed vintage car photos on the walls. The workshop itself gleamed with new equipment alongside, lovingly restored older tools that had belonged to Amara's father. Vanessa Jackson was arranging pastries on a tray when they entered. She looked up with a warm smile. The tired circles that had once shadowed her eyes noticeably faded. The past 3 years had eased many burdens for her as well. "Richard, glad you could make it. Luis called to say he's running a few minutes late. Something about bringing a surprise." She hugged her daughter quickly. "Everything ready in the shop?" Amara nodded. "Just finished the final inventory check. We're good to go." The bell above the door jingled as Luis Torres entered, carrying a large gift-wrapped package. At 62, Luis had become a central figure in Amara's life, part mentor, part father figure, and now her business partner. After retiring from Richard's private collection, he had agreed to help run the Jackson garage until Amara finished college. "Sorry I'm late," he said, setting down the package. "Had to make sure this was ready for today." Amara eyed the package, curiously. "What's that?" "Open it and see," Luis encouraged. Carefully, Amara unwrapped the package to reveal a wooden display case with a glass front. Inside, mounted against dark blue velvet, was a piece of rubber hose with metal clamps on either end. "Is this?" Amara began, recognition dawning. "Your first repair," Luis confirmed with a proud smile. "The temporary fix you made on Mr. Donovan's Mustang. I kept it all this time. Thought it should hang here in your shop, where every customer can see that sometimes the most impressive solutions are the ones you make with whatever you have on hand." Tears sprang to Amara's eyes as she ran her fingers over the glass. "Thank you, Luis. This means everything." The small group spent the morning preparing for the official opening. At noon, they gathered outside for a simple ribbon-cutting ceremony. A few local reporters had shown up, partly because of the unique story behind the business and partly because Richard Donovan's presence guaranteed at least some media attention. Amara stood before the small crowd, suddenly nervous. Public speaking had never been her strong suit. She glanced down at her note cards, then at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. 3 years ago, Amara began, her voice gaining strength with each word. I was walking home from school when I saw a broken-down car on the side of the road. I didn't know then that helping a stranger fix his Mustang would change my life. I just did what my father had taught me. Never walk past someone with car trouble if you can help. She looked at Richard, who stood quietly to the side, allowing her this moment in the spotlight. Mr. Donovan could have simply thanked me and moved on. Instead, he recognized something in me that I wasn't sure anyone else could see. He invested not just in my education but in my dream of continuing what my father started. Amara gestured to the building behind her. This garage isn't just a business, it's a legacy. My father believed that everyone deserves quality repair, work, regardless of what they can afford to pay. That's the principle we're bringing back to this community today. She reached for the large scissors that had been prepared for the ribbon cutting. Jackson and Daughter Auto Restoration is officially open for business. As cheers erupted from the small crowd, Amara cut the ribbon. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment for the local papers. But the most meaningful image wouldn't appear in any publication. The look of quiet pride on her mother's face, and the way the sunlight caught the silver ring on Amara's finger as she opened the door to her future. Later that afternoon, after the crowd had dispersed and the reporters had left, Amara found herself alone with Richard in the workshop. His Mustang sat in the first bay, ready for its regular maintenance. I brought her in for the first official service, Richard said, patting the car's fender affectionately. Seemed fitting. Amara nodded, running her hand along the midnight blue paint. From temporary roadside fix to official restoration shop, we've come full circle. Speaking of which, Richard said, reaching into his pocket, I have something for you. He handed her a small envelope. Inside, Amara found a document, the transfer of ownership for the Donovan Foundation's remaining 24% share in the business. But I haven't even graduated yet, she protested, looking up in surprise. The agreement was that I could buy out the foundation's share gradually after finishing school. Richard shrugged. The foundation's board voted unanimously to transfer ownership early. Your business plan has been so solid that we've already seen a return on the initial investment through the first 2 years of operation. Consider it a graduation gift. A bit early. Amara stared at the paper, barely able to process what it meant. So the garage is completely ours now? Mom's and mine? 100%, Richard confirmed. You did it, Amara. You rebuilt your father's legacy and you did it your way. No debts, no favors owed. Just hard work and extraordinary talent. Emotions welled up in Amara's throat. She looked around the workshop, at the tools that had once been her father's, at the waiting cars that customers had already brought in, trusting her skills, at the plaque Luis had given her hanging prominently on the wall. Thank you, she said finally, her voice thick. Not just for this, but for seeing something in me that day, for taking a chance on a high school kid with oil-stained hands. Richard smiled. Best investment I ever made. He glanced at his watch. I should get going. Board meeting in an hour. When should I pick up the Mustang? I'll work on it myself, Amara promised. It'll be ready tomorrow afternoon. After Richard left, Amara stayed in the quiet workshop, breathing in the familiar smells of oil and metal and possibility. She looked down at the ring on her finger, her father's lucky charm that had somehow guided her to this moment. We did it, Dad, she whispered to the empty room. We really did it. Outside, the sign caught the late afternoon sun. The words, Jackson and Daughter, casting a long shadow across the parking lot. Inside, a young woman stood in the center of her dream come true, ready to carry forward a legacy built on skill, integrity, and the courage to help a stranger with a broken-down car even when they doubted her.